Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for the Middle East Unit, Chapter 29, Section 4. And we're going to talk about after the Cold War. After communism ended in what is now a region of southeastern Europe, the nation of Yugoslavia basically in the early 1990s, experienced violence between ethnic groups known as the Serbians, the Bosnians, and the Herzegovinians, led to bloodshed between ethnic Serbs and Muslims in what is now the nation of Bosnia. Uh, NATO forces or peacekeeping forces were sent to maintain order. The policy of trying to eliminate an ethnic group from society through killing or forced immigration is called ethnic cleansing. And this is a term that has kind of been coined really since the end of World War II. In a way, when we talk about the genocide that occurred in Europe during the Second World War, there's not a lot of difference between that and what occurred in what used to be Yugoslavia during the 1990s. Anyway, violence ended in Bosnia in the year 1995 with the signing of the Dayton Accords, signed in Dayton, Ohio. But it was an agreement between these nations, the Serbs from Serbia, the Bosnians, the Herzegovinians, the Croats, for the most part, to stop their fighting and to respect the borders that had been established. During the time of ethnic cleansing, uh, we saw people who were detained in basically what was concentration camps. And as you can see with the images below, many of these prisoners were starved to death. Number two, the Persian Gulf War began when the nation of Iraq, led at that time by Saddam Hussein, invaded the nation of Kuwait back in August of 1990. The United States felt that oil supplies in the nation of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia were threatened by this action. One of the main reasons why Saddam Hussein invaded the nation of Kuwait, and as you can see on the map there, Kuwait is a very, very small country, kind of at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, but there is a huge oil reserve that is in that region. And if you look at the map there below, there's kind of like a shading of green on that map. And it's basically within that region that you're going to see some of the biggest oil reserves. Uh, the Iraqis assumed that that oil was being maybe pumped out too much by the Kuwaitis, and they felt that they deserved to have just as much access to it, and so they invaded the nation of Kuwait. Kuwait, for the most part, was a pretty defenseless nation. They didn't really have much of a military, and so they were easily taken over by the Iraqi forces in 1990. Anyway, the United States led a multi-nation United Nations force that eventually would invade Kuwait in the year 1991, the month of February. Anyway, their goal was to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and hence they were able to liberate Kuwait and were able to push the Iraqi forces back within the Iraqi border. Um, but before the Iraqis left, they did cause one of the biggest man made environmental disasters. What they basically did is they went to a lot of these oil wells in Kuwait and set them on fire. And as you can see in the photo there, that kind of blackened the skies. What was sad is forces from the UN, when they came and occupied this area, a lot of those soldiers were exposed to the fumes. And subsequently, in the time that has passed, some soldiers developed illnesses related to the pollutants that were in the air, even in the case of developing some forms of cancer. Anyway, so it was a huge mess. And needless to say, we still have to deal with Saddam Hussein because that was not the mission of this invasion, is to oust him from power. It was to get him out of the nation of Kuwait. And so we've got unfinished business. In 1993, the Palestinians and the Israelis signed what is known as the Oslo Accords. This was an agreement in which the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or AKA the PLO, recognized Israel's right to exist. And Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. The thing to remember is that the PLO, for many years, was kind of considered to be a terroristic group. And so to have this agreement really kind of changed the relationship that the PLO is going to have within the media and as far as the rest of the world. This accord didn't necessarily bring peace, and there's still division in this part of the world yet to this day. In the fall of 2001, the United States government responded to the 9/11 attacks by launching a series of attacks against Afghanistan, targeting the group Al Qaeda. Anyway, an Islamic terroristic organization, that's what Al Qaeda is. They also targeted a group known as the Taliban, which was a group governing the nation of Afghanistan according to strict interpretations of Islamic law. The Taliban ruled Afghanistan. They had basically acquired power when the Soviets left Afghanistan after fighting a war for roughly 10 years. The deal is the Taliban supported and protected members of Al Qaeda, including a fellow named Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was actually a Saudi Arabian citizen who, during the time of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan back in the late 1970s, went to Afghanistan to fight and became basically involved in what would eventually become Al Qaeda. So anyway, in March of 2003, the United States launched an invasion against the nation of Iraq. This is the unfinished business. It was believed that Saddam Hussein possessed chemical weapons and had supported anti-American terroristic organizations such as Al Qaeda. Anyway, the military quickly toppled the Iraqi government, but American weapon inspectors failed to find any biological or chemical weapons. Sometimes these weapons are known as weapons of mass destruction. Even though Saddam Hussein had used some of these kind of weapons against his own people, particularly against the Kurds that lived in the northern part of Iraq in the early 1990s, we didn't find evidence of that. Okay, Saddam Hussein went on the run after we invaded, and eventually he would be found hiding in a hole in the ground. And if you take a look at the images there on the right-hand side of the screen, when we found Saddam, he was bearded, he had lost a lot of weight, had kind of gotten very old in his appearance. He was turned over to the Iraqi people, and they put him on trial. And eventually they found him guilty of war crimes, and he was eventually executed. Thank you very much.